Welcome to Your Success Podcast. We give you actionable insight and stories behind real-life success wherever you go. Here are your hosts, Angelos and Mo.
Your Success Podcast is proudly sponsored by Your Tax Partners, specialists in helping business owners and property investors to understand the wide range of tax issues that impact on their income, gains, and overall wealth. Now, let's get into the show.
Welcome to Your Success Podcast. I'm Angelos.
And I'm Mo.
Today we are privileged to be joined again by Peter Hill, Director at Holt & Co, and someone who's perfectly placed to discuss today's topic, which is successful hiring. How to recruit, retain and develop talent in your business.
So Peter, thank you for joining us again. So the first question we've got for you is, should you hire straight away when you're starting up a new business?
I probably ought to start by saying I'm not an HR expert, because there will be HR experts looking at this going, you can't do that. My experience of HR, recruitment, hiring, firing is partially based over 30 years of doing it in our business, and I would guess we probably had maybe 200 come and go in that time, some good, some bad. But also, of course, we deal with hundreds of clients, and certainly at a higher level, we are often involved in their recruitment decisions. So my experience is very practical, hiring and firing, rather than, but the rules say you should do this or this. So with that caveat, let me start with this question about when you hire that first recruit. As I was thinking about it, one of the key things was, I don't think there's any difference between hiring the first recruit and the 100th recruit. The principles are exactly the same. And as I was reflecting on 30 years of how that's changed, the big difference I can see is when I started work, you could put an advert in the paper and be inundated with reasonably high quality candidates because there was high unemployment. There were good people looking for jobs. I would say most people that are looking for jobs at the moment fall into a category of either unemployable, you don't want them, or they don't want work. There are not many good candidates looking for work. They're in work, they're being looked after, they're being rewarded. So there's a real challenge, whether it's your first recruit or your 100th recruit, to actually, how do you find them? The second issue is, because of that full employment, it takes ages to find that recruit, interview that recruit, decide to take them on. Then they're probably on 3 months' notice because they are already in work. So the time lag between when you go, I think we need a recruit, number 1 or number 100, and actually having that recruit on your payroll can be months, many months, 6 months, longer sometimes. So the timing of it really comes down to, you've got to take somebody on before you really need them, or certainly start that recruitment process before you really need them. That's, I think, the biggest challenge, because small businesses don't want to do that. They want to get to the point where they've already got most of a job ready, so the minute that recruit hits the ground, they're earning cash. And that's a problem, because by the time you get to that decision, you're already working 70-hour weeks, you're already run ragged by the pressure of work. And the temptation then is, that recruit in front of you is the best recruit available, I need them. Not necessarily they're the right recruit.
And you mentioned, definitely. And you mentioned there about them making money as soon as they start. What's your view on sort of targeting to say, is it 3 months, 6 months, a year, and they have to sort of pay their way? Or how do you look at that in terms of them being able to pay for themselves and add value?
Yeah, it depends on the level of recruit. In our business, for example, we would probably say 3 months is costing us money. Someone's training them, someone's developing them. They know nothing about our organisation, so they're learning about us as well as about the task in hand. 3 to 6 months, they should be covering their costs. They should be at least earning enough to cover payroll costs and all the rest of it, and starting to be a bit more self-contained, so somebody else is back to their job. After 6 months, if they're not earning us any money, there's a problem of some description. Now that will be different, because in some businesses they can hit the ground and be more productive sooner. But certainly you should start your recruitment process knowing what you think that cycle is. How quickly are they going to be productive? Because you've got to make a decision about how much is it going to cost me from the point I decide, yes, I want them, to the point where they're self-financing. because you've got to fund that. That's the big decision.
And what about people that are not, say, fee earners or are not bringing in business? So it's a bit of a selfish question, because at the moment we're looking at bringing a PA on board, which obviously isn't going to earn us money, but the value is in freeing up the time. How do you value that, those kind of jobs?
We would do it exactly the same way, which is, okay, if I recruit a PA for me, for example, I'm doing a calculation that says, well, how many hours a week of my time will that liberate? And what can I earn in that time frame? Not what can they earn, because they're probably not chargeable to any clients. So in any organisation, the question for a recruiter is, what do they bring in? So if it's a salesman, how many sales are they going to create? If it's a producer, how many hours are they going to bill? If it's a support person, how many hours are they going to liberate for someone else to go and bill? It's the same calculation, because at the end of the day, there is no point in taking somebody on who's going to cost you money and add nothing. You know, every recruit should be adding more than they cost at an appropriate time in the next 3, 6, 12 months. And if you can't see that happening, then don't take on that recruit. The only exception to that, and I've got a few clients where it is the case, is where they're towards the end of their working life and actually their objective is to reduce time and pressure, and they accept there is an on-cost to achieve that, and that recruit may therefore not generate revenue, it may liberate time. But for most startup businesses, growing businesses, every recruit should be, will they add more value than they cost directly or indirectly?
Mm-hmm. So Peter, what are your thoughts about hiring part-time versus full-time? There must be some pros and cons to each of those.
This is where you start to get into the dangerous territory of HR regulations, because some of those decisions are not yours to make. So where we have, and we've had many of them, women at work get pregnant, leave, have babies, they have rights to whether they come back part-time. We can consider those options and we can say yes or no, but once you've said yes to one, you're committed. So ignoring for the moment the regulatory issues of what you have to do, if you're asking my personal preference is full-time every time. Because if that person is useful, well, I'd rather they were useful 40 hours a week than useful 20 hours a week. There are always dead time in any working day. You know, they're talking about what was on last night's TV programs. They're, you know, catching up on family stuff, etc. And that might be an hour or two a week. Well, if that's an hour or two a week out of 40 hours, you still get 38 hours of chargeable time. If it's out of 20 hours, you're only getting 18 hours. So the cost of that overhead, that downtime, that, you know, stuff gets absorbed over more hours full-time than part-time. Having said that, we have been very fortunate that we've had a lot of women who've returned part-time. And again, I'm not being sexist, but we have had no experiences of men taking a paternal part-time role. That does happen some places. But we've been very lucky that the vast majority of women we've had return to part-time roles actually give us full-time commitment. They're as committed, loyal, engaged, productive as some of our full-timers. So we actually get full-time commitment for part-time pay. So it can work out brilliant. There are occasions when part-time gets to the point where it just isn't worth it. You're just not getting enough value out of those part-time hours. 10 hours a week probably is not worth it. So for me, full-time is better, because a good employee, I want as many hours as I can get from them. Part-time, it depends on the individual, but you can make it work. Going back to your first question about your first recruit or your second recruit, well, that's a much bigger challenge if your first recruit is 3 days a week, because no one's doing their job the other 2 days a week. In our organisation, where we've probably got 8 or 9 part-timers, they can cover between them the gaps that naturally arise. So you can work it out that actually if we've got 8 part-timers, that's 6 full-timers and they cover those jobs, not a problem. In a small business, startup business, I think that is more of a challenge, and therefore I would probably say if you can get good full-time, get good full-time.
Okay, thanks.
I think that makes a lot of sense. So you sort of covered it there, but what would you say about job share, where you have people? Is that sort of like where you were saying you can fill the gaps between part-timers?
Same principle. Yeah. Again, like any recruitment, what's their job description? What's expected of them? What days do they work? Can that overlap with the other person? But I would say on the whole, maybe we've been very lucky, but engaged, committed, positive employees, they work out the nitty-gritty of that. They make it work because they want it to work. It's good for them to have that flexibility. Once or twice over the years, we've had somebody who takes part-time working as no, I'm not engaged for the other hours. And that ultimately is a cultural problem, not a working hours or value for money issue. That's someone's not engaged with your business, and the part-time issue isn't the issue, it's they're not engaged with your business. So it can work. I would say, like any recruitment, it's about clarity. What's the job description? What's expected? What do you think they should be doing in those 20 hours a week or whatever it is? How flexible are you on childcare issues? We'll come on to that as we talk about some of the other broader issues of recruitment, but specifically about part-timers, I think it's about clarity. What do you want from them? What do you expect from them?
And so during the interview process, do you trust your gut feeling? Do you use metrics? How do you approach that when you take people on for interview?
I think in terms of gut feeling, the answer is yes and no. You should not recruit exclusively on gut feeling. There should be a robust process that says, let's define what we're looking for. And I would say that's one of the weaknesses many of my clients have, is they're not clear on what they're looking for. They think the interview process will help them decide that. And therefore they end up tailoring the job that they want to the best recruit they find, which is not always the right answer. So the process must be very clear job descriptions. What do we want that person to do? How many hours do we need them for? Do we expect to work in the office, out on site? Whatever those things are, crystal clarity on the job. The recruitment process then must be robust. So have they got a CV? Have we checked references? Have we done a proper interview, etc., etc.? That should get you most of the way down that process. And if that fails, gut instinct or otherwise, if their CV is appalling, if their references don't stack up, then gut instinct is relevant. When you get to, on paper, this looks like the right person, I think this is a good recruit. Sometimes you could tick all the boxes and right at the end you go, but something in there is telling me that's not right. And you should absolutely rely on your gut instinct, because certainly for us, and it depends how many recruitments you've done. When you've done 200, your gut instinct is usually right. Something in there is saying, we've been here before and this will go wrong. Careful with just your gut instinct, because you might be having a bad day. If you're the person who needs that recruit, the temptation to recruit somebody who's not quite right is greater. Somebody else says, well, it's not my problem. I looked at them, I wouldn't give them time of day. They've got to go. And therefore, other people's gut instinct, sometimes without the nitty-gritty, they weren't in the interview process, they haven't seen that. You're just saying, chat for 5 minutes and tell you what you think. And if they come out and go, guy's an idiot, then trust that judgment. So system, process, structure every time, but the firing and the hiring decision is usually, that feels right to me.
Yeah, that's a really good point. We've got a real life example that we've just taken on a full-time bookkeeper, and we went through, and the biggest thing was zero experience, 2 years of zero experience, and that was that having that clarity that was the number one thing we needed. Helped eliminate so many. We actually had quite a lot of applicants through, which was quite lucky, but it really helped drill down into who was right and who was wrong.
I think the clarity of that job description, so if that's a key facet of their skills, zero experience is right up there, make that clear and dismiss those other candidates. However, I would say in our experience, our broad rule of thumb is we hire on attitude because we can teach them everything else. So the right person who didn't have zero skills, we might go, can I teach them that as quickly as I need them to get it to, because they are absolutely the right person. Simon Law, one of our partners, as you know, came to us when we didn't have a job for him, as what would have been then our most expensive recruitment ever, and we didn't have a job for him. And we interviewed him and thought, we need to give him a job. Therefore, that was nothing to do with skill sets and everything else. That was to do with he was the right guy at the wrong time. Ouch, we've got to recruit.
People say, don't they, that they're like people are constantly recruiting. I think Rob Moore actually mentioned that in previous interviews, that he's just constantly on the lookout for good people, good culture, good vibe about them, and
it goes
attitude.
Back to when the first question, which is about when do you hire that first person or the 100th person. We're always, every day of the week, looking for a good recruit. And if we found a great recruit and didn't have a job for them, we'd worry about not having a job for them later, because good recruits, especially in a full employment marketplace, they are thin on the ground. So if you find one, you take them and you worry about what you're going to do with them later. If you wait till you need someone, they're gone. And part of our rationale for recruiting Simon Law at the time was, if we didn't take him, one of our competitors would have done. That would have made our life harder. So the best thing to do to stop him going somewhere else was recruit him into our business. So I absolutely agree. Recruitment is a constant process of looking for talent. And if you find talent when you haven't got a job, Well, that's an easier problem to fix, keeping them busy, because at the very least, well, I'll go and play golf then, and they can do the job I was doing. The biggest challenge is finding the right person when you need them. So if that's the biggest challenge, find the right person all the time and recruit them when you find them. The bigger you are, when you employ 50 people like we do, you can make a recruitment decision, because actually one more person on the payroll is not a big challenge. When it's your second or third employee, that's a huge step in payroll costs. But I think you've got to start a business. There's an expression you probably heard me say it before in some of the other ones, which is if you don't have the financial resources to recruit the right person, even though you don't have a job for them, you probably should think very carefully about whether you're in business for the right reasons. And we use an expression which is, you don't have a business, you have a job working for yourself. So that one-man band plumber doesn't have a business, he has a job working for himself. If you want to be a plumbing business that employs 5 people, you are probably going to have to recruit someone when you can't afford them.
Yeah.
And therefore you need the resources, you need the confidence, you need to put your house on the line, whatever those things are, to get from A to B. And if you don't have the courage to do that, you probably won't get to B.
Peter, there are many cliche questions that come up during the interview. I think we all know what they are. Probably the funniest one that I like is, what is your biggest weakness? What do you think of that question?
That is one of the big cliche questions. There are lots of others we could talk about, but I guess perhaps I'd bounce it back to you then. So if we were in an interview and I said, okay, Angelos, excuse me, what's your biggest weakness, Angelos? What would your response to that be?
Kryptonite?
Oh, God.
You're fired. Get out.
Oh, no.
I have to say,
Can we edit that out?
whilst I've seen that question asked in that way, I've never seen an answer like that.
Usually you get like, I'm just too diligent, or like I'm too hardworking, or something like that. Yeah.
I think your big question is, what about cliche questions? Because the danger with cliche questions is you get cliched answers. People pre-prepare for those kind of questions and they give you a pat response that they think is the right answer. One of the things that I have done over the years is I went on a course which was about listening skills, and it said, you ask a question, so what's your biggest weakness? They come back and say, oh, I'm a perfectionist, and you say nothing. You just look at them. Now that's really hard because I like the sound of my own voice, so not talking is really difficult. But if you say nothing for long enough, they will start talking again. And the more you can get a candidate to talk, rather than answer questions, question, answer, the more you can shut up and just make them talk, because they will fill that gap. They will be more uncomfortable about the silence than you are. When they keep talking, eventually they will tell you what you really want to know. And if they have a weakness, that will come out. They might go, yeah, I know I say kryptonite, but really my big weakness is, I chase women around the office. Right, I'm so
Has he knows that. Seen you at work.
So I think your point about cliche questions is absolutely right. There are standard questions you see time and time again. You get standard responses. They're not real. They don't give you a flavour of that person. So I think the trick is shut up, let the candidate keep talking, and every time they say, oh, my biggest weakness is I'm a perfectionist, well, what do you mean by that? How is that a weakness? Give me an example when that's been a weakness. Tell me more about that. They will tell you what you need to know, because they will just fill that gap with useful information.
I'm glad I've never been interviewed by you, if I'm honest. What about competency-based questions? I suppose you sort of mentioned it there, like tell me about a time. Do you use those? Do you think there's value in those?
I think there is, but again, the danger with an interview is it's a very artificial situation, because they're on edge, the employees are as on edge. Even those people doing the recruitment questions are slightly on edge. It is an artificial conversation. So I think there's a process where you go through of asking about the CV, tell me about that, exploration to try and get that person relaxed and comfortable. The real issue is just get them talking. Tell me what you do outside of work. Because if you can find, I'm into amateur dramatics and I was in this play, they'll talk with passion. You'll get a flavour of the character, the personality, the enthusiasm of someone if you get them off detail, get them to talk about what they're passionate about. And if they are passionate about nothing, think again about their recruitment. So I'm less bothered about the question. I think you can ask questions about anything you like. It's getting the candidate talking in a natural, relaxed way. That's when you really find out what they're about.
It's quite funny that you mentioned about the interviewers being on edge as well. I remember actually one of my most successful interviews I did as a candidate was at RBS for a call centre job, and the guy that interviewed me was so nervous. It was obviously the first interview he'd ever done, and he actually had a bit of paper with the questions he had to ask, and the top of each box it had in small writing things to look for in the answer. And I could actually read those from like where he was sitting, and like he was so nervous, and he sort of had the paper out, whereas it wasn't hidden or anything like that. So I was just sort of looking at it and then phrasing answers around what the things to tick off were on. It was best interview I've ever done.
That's just triggered a memory. So I was 16 at the time, Peter, and I was looking for work, and an opportunity came up in a local bank in Plymouth, and I thought, well, okay. So I went there, naive, didn't really understand how the interview process went. Suited and booted, went there, and I was waiting, and she was 15 minutes late, the person who's going to interview me. Mm-hmm. And she walked in, and I was a bit annoyed, having 16-year-old Angelos having to wait for the interview. And I told her, you're 15 minutes late. It was one of the shortest interviews I've ever had. Needless to say, I didn't get the job.
Although it's a fair question, I have to say.
Yeah.
Oh my God. That's throwing me off.
Just finishing that point on interviews and getting them talking. One of the things we always try and do is we have more than one interview. So one interview is about get the detail out of the way, meet them, your instant reaction might be enough to say, don't go again. If it's someone you think, well, actually that worked quite well, the CV stacks up, then meet them again, talk to them again, get a second person to have a conversation with them because they'll get a slightly different perspective. So I think the challenge of trying to say, I've got an hour to find out all I need to know about this somebody who's going to become a hopefully long-term 20-year employee that I'm going to pay, 40 grand a year for 20 years. That's a huge investment decision. And a lot of people make that on a 30-minute interview. So 2 interviews, 3 interviews more if needed for senior and important recruits, more people talking to them, longer interviews, because you really want to get that right.
And also with your second and third interviews, they're going to be more relaxed.
Absolutely.
So you'll see the real character
come
out.
I suppose the other part about interviews is it's also an opportunity for you to sell the business, because as much as you want them, well, as much as they want the job, you want them to like where they're going to come into and choose it over another offer. They might get another offer.
Especially in full employment situation, because we are in a competitive environment. I saw an article the other day that described it as a war for talent. We are all fighting for the best people out there because there aren't enough. I would say with almost no exceptions in the last 5 years, our recruits have been taken from a competitor because none of them are looking for work. They're all gainfully employed. They're all being looked after. So you really are in a competitive environment, and therefore you do have to show off. You do have to sell yourself.
Why is the job market like that at the minute?
Essentially, it's about full employment. As I said right at the start, most people who want a job have got a job, and therefore when you want to recruit someone, you're either fishing in the pool of people who are unemployable, don't really want a job. I mean, we've had people come to interviews because if they don't go to enough interviews, they don't get their benefits. They don't want the job. They just turned up because if they don't turn up, they don't get their benefits. That's the real challenge in a full environment. Whether you're looking for bar staff or chartered accountants or whatever, we have a full employment marketplace. And it's actually worse now because the dreaded Brexit work, some good candidates are going home. They're going back to European countries. So the pressure on the system for people is enormous right now. And therefore you've got to show off, you've got to sell yourselves. We have a whole part of an interview process where we talk about our firm, we sell the firm's culture, they can meet other people who work here. We're talking about how we've got from where we are to where we're going, what our plans are. We are doing a selling job, because we are often trying to persuade somebody that we are a better option than the good employer that they're already with. That's a tough job. You really do have to sell.
Yeah. So we've talked about interviewing, but what do you do when things aren't going well? So you've hired someone, and following that, can you give us some horror stories if you've got any?
I think just starting with that recruitment process. So nobody intends to hire a bad employee. We all want them to be an 8 or 9 out of 10 when we interview. The danger is sometimes that we see them through rose-tinted glasses. So we think they're an 8 or 9 out of 10. They're going to be an 8 or 9 out of 10, and they probably aren't, and we just want them to be, so we will them into that position. So we recruit those people. If you're lucky, they are an 8 or 9 out of 10. Didn't we do well? Fantastic. probably they're a 7 out of 10, good enough. We might be able to improve them, train them with time, but they're earning their money, they're okay. They might be a 3 or 4 out of 10, and then we'll come on to that in a second in terms of, right, you've got to tackle that, you've got to deal with that, and the quicker you deal with it, the better. The real problem is this no man's land where they're not good enough to hire, but they're not bad enough to fire. So once they're on your payroll, you just go, oh, it's not what we expected, but you don't tackle it. You leave them as 6 out of 10, which upsets your other employees who are working really hard, isn't adding much value to your business, but isn't so awful that you want to go through the process of sacking them and getting another person.
But do you think a 6 out of 10 in this employment market is acceptable?
Do you compromise?
No, you can't compromise, because the minute you start compromising, it is a slippery slope of quality. And we've had conversations, you and I, before. Right now, we are turning away more work than we take on, because we are not able to grow our people with the right calibre as quick as we want. So our balancing of supply and demand is to restrict the work that's coming in the organisation. If we could find 10 brilliant people, we could be 50% bigger in no time at all. But we can't, and therefore, rather than recruit to match demand with people who aren't really that good, all you end up with is a bigger business. Not any better, probably not making you any more money, it's just bigger. So
and you don't want it to affect the brand and your reputation.
Never recruit simply to fill a job with the wrong person. Having said that, we think they're the right person when we recruit them. The problem is when they don't turn out to be that way. So your question about what do you do about it, first thing is you've got to know it's not going well. And lots of organisations I know don't know that. They're not monitoring performance. They're not measuring output. We have a 6-week interview after recruitment. So once they've started, 6 weeks later, we almost re-interview them. 6 weeks after they've started. How is it going for you? What are you up to? We talk to the people who are supervising them. How is it going? Are they as good as we thought? What are their weaknesses? What have they done wrong? What have they done well? We do that again after 3 months. We do it after 6 months. We do it after a year. We now have, as you probably know, up to 2 years to go, that's not working, you're gone without consequence. Frankly, if you've left it 2 years to make that decision, you've messed something up. You should know within 3 to 6 months. Sometimes you know within days, but you know within 3 to 6 months. Lots of businesses don't know that because they're not looking for that. They go, great, new recruit, you look after him, I'm off. And therefore they don't know it's going wrong. So number one is you've got to know it's going wrong, and that requires measurement, reviews, personal development reviews, counselling, whatever term you call it. There must be a process that says, let's check. When you check, if it's not working, you then have 2 options. Fix it, be very clear on what your expectations are. You're not where we thought you would be, we want you to be higher. Or tackle it quickly and remove them. I would say we have made the mistake, and most of my clients make the mistake of not tackling that directly and cleanly enough. Probably most organisations would have a number of employees where they should have said after 3 weeks, it's not working, you're gone. Let's not fall out over it, we're sorry, it's not working out, you're gone. They don't, because they want it to work. They don't want to have to go back out and recruit again. And the end result is you do end up with a 6 out of 10 employee who not only is not doing very much for you, but is actually undermining the 7, 8, and 9 out of 10 employees that are working their backsides off to perform. So what do you do about it? You have to tackle it fast, you have to tackle it hard, and you have to decide whether you think it is fixable. Can I train, develop, improve, educate, manage that person better, or actually is there a fundamental mistake we've made at recruitment? And I would say more often than not, that's probably a fundamental recruitment mistake, and you should bite the bullet and get on with it.
Do you ever find that it can be a temporary thing, that they've got things going in their personal life or something, and that it's actually something you can say, okay, well, this is happening, so we'll be empathetic to that and give them 3 months, 6 months and review it again? Or
you can, and certainly over, some of our people have worked for us for 25 years, over a lifetime with someone, well, when they have young children and they're not sleeping for months on end, that's going to impact on the performance. Yeah.
Look forward to that.
I've had 4 kids. I empathise with that. I've been there. Yeah. Some people go through marital difficulties. I remember reading somewhere they said asking someone to leave their problems at the office door is like saying leave your leg behind. You can't. You take that with you all day. If you're worried about financial difficulties, relationship difficulties, you can't leave that at the door and do a great deal of work. our job as a caring employer is to help them if we can, understand and empathise if we can't, and give them time to sort it out. Even in those situations, though, the clarity of, we understand where you are, this isn't going well, so actually, please don't do that work because you're making mistakes on it and that's going to be a problem for us. Do this work instead because it's less important. So sometimes flexibility is about take them off that task, and give them a different task. Sometimes it's just, okay, it'll take time, we'll live with it. You've been here 10 years, you've got our loyalty. If you've got those problems in month 1, month 2, month 3, you do need to seriously think about whether that is going to be a constant problem. But yeah, you've got to be sympathetic to the outside world is affecting all of us. None of us, without challenge. If they've got financial difficulties, that's a worry. That keeps people awake at night. It's a problem that we have to empathise with.
So Peter, you've recruited a good recruit, a good 7 or 8 out of 10, and they're going to make a difference and help your company. But part of that is making sure that they understand the values, the principles of what Mark Holt is all about. How do you build that creative and positive culture within your new recruitment?
It's difficult. It's the only thing I would say to you over 30 years of trying to do that is it's like running in treacle. It's like pushing jelly up a wall, all those kind of cliches, because every recruit you take on and everyone you lose changes that dynamic. It is a constantly fluid issue of what is your culture. Now, some of the things are fundamental. So we have a commitment statement that all our employees sign, and we sign it. We will treat them with respect. They will tell us the truth. We will pay them on time. They will work hard. There are a number of things in that commitment statement that says this is a two-way relationship. This is what we expect from you, but this is what you can expect from us. And those are given. They don't change depending on who's on the payroll, because those are absolutes. Trust is an absolute. You can't say, okay, at the moment we want to be able to trust our employees, but next month that won't be important. That's absolute. That's all the time. Then there's stuff which is about how do you make people enjoy coming to work? What fun can you have? How can you make work enjoyable? That is different depending on who's on the payroll, because some people like doing some things, some people like doing something else. When we had only 5 people on the payroll, you could pretty much pick anything you wanted to do, and all 5 people said, yeah, that sounds like fun, we'll do that. When you've got 50 people on the payroll, you haven't got a cat and hell's chance of getting something that everybody wants to do. So you have to adapt as you grow with culture to make sure that you're engaging as many people as often as you can around these core values of, whatever they are for your business, but we have a core value document that says this is what we think are absolutes. There's no way around these things. These are absolutes. So I think some of it is about, have fun. Some of it is about basic good discipline of praise regularly. If you say thank you for a job well done, you've no idea how people's chests puff up when you do that, and people don't do it very often. You need to reprimand.
And it's free.
It's free, absolutely, yeah. Well, I say it's easy. It's not as easy as it should be, really, but praise regularly, praise publicly, reprimand quickly, directly, and privately, because people need to know when they've stepped off the line, and actually they value that. It's like young children. They need rules, they need guidelines, they need structure. So praise, good goal setting. There's a book called The 1 Minute Manager. I don't know if you come across it. It's about how do you very quickly, in 1 minute, praise, reprimand, and set goals. And it's a really good book. It's worth having.
For bringing up kids as well. As well as
exactly the same. Yeah, exactly the same.
This podcast's turned into a parenting podcast.
Yeah.
We did an interview the other day and we got into parenting tips. So I suppose there's parallels.
There are a lot of parallels, yeah. I mean, when my children were younger, you do need discipline, you do need structure, they do need to know where the boundary lines are, and it's the same with work, and we all need that structure. So I think there are some tips like, make sure you have fun, we celebrate birthdays, we have lots of events together, we set aside a budget each year, so we have a budget this year, which they are in control of, the team are in control of, to be able to say, what do you want? Do you want a fancy Christmas party with all your partners invited, or do you want a summer event that you can do? You decide what floats your boat.
I was just going to say, how do you... I've heard before that people feel valued when they can understand how the small bit of work they do fits into the big scheme of the company and how it progresses and grows. How do you communicate that to your guys to say, okay, you gave a really good example earlier actually of the reception desk. Maybe you could share that as well, and how that fits into the whole picture.
You're absolutely right. People want to do worthwhile work. That's, on any of the measures you find about why people go to work, doing worthwhile work is high up that list, higher than pay in most cases. So you have to find a way of making sure that every cog in your organisation understands why that cog is important. And as you say, we were talking about our receptionist, who we don't call receptionist, we call her or them directors of first impressions. When a potential new client comes in the front door, they are going to make a judgment about our organisation based on the first minute that they are in that building. How well they're greeted. Would you like a tea or coffee? Would you like a drink off our menu? There's different options, frothy coffees, all sorts of things. The impact that has, and I share this with our Director of First Impressions often, the impact that has on my ability to convert that potential client to a client and the amount of money they will spend and the trust they will place in us is directly linked to the confidence they've got about the organisation based on the first 30 seconds in reception. They need to know that to know how important it is to keep doing that. And that's the same with every other person. It doesn't matter whether they're the cleaner who's cleaning the office. Well, a clean office is a productive office. You don't lose files when you don't want to. You don't spill coffee over things because it's not organised properly. You have a clean cup in the morning so you can do your job properly because somebody's bothered to wash them up. They're all very small cogs in the organisation, and you need to make sure every person says, I understand where my cog fits, and I understand if I don't do my bit right, it doesn't work properly. So you're absolutely right. The challenge is you've got to remember to do it. You've got to keep doing it because you said it once and you think you've said it once, but you've got to keep saying it. And the next recruit comes along, you have a different director of first impressions, and you've got to go through the same process of explaining that again. So it sometimes feels like you're repeating yourself, but you do have to. You have to keep pushing that message about how every person in the organisation is doing part of the job that makes it all work.
Brilliant. Well, there's lots of great advice here for anyone who's starting up a company and even scaling up or established businesses. The concepts remain the same. So thank you for your time today, Peter.
Can I just add one quick point, because it was in my notes and I didn't get to it. But
go on.
One of the problems I find in lots of organisations is they do encounter those problems and they don't tackle them. They don't tackle them partially because of fear of the consequences. I'll end up in an employment tribunal. Oh, she's pregnant at the moment, therefore I can't even have that conversation. And they push those problems to one side. One of the techniques that we've used in lots of clients is to say, okay, I understand your fear of the cost of action. We could end up in a tribunal. How much would it cost? I need to put a counter argument. What's the cost of inaction? If I don't tackle this recruit, what is that costing me in other people's morale and energy levels, because they know they're carrying that person, in mistakes they're making with customers that cost you money, in salary you're paying that employee for doing half the job they really should be doing. As soon as you quantify the cost of not making a decision, in almost every case I've ever done that, is significantly greater than the cost of doing it and doing it badly. So I've often been criticised by HR experts in seminars where I've said, just fire them. Just walk in today and say, we don't want you here, you're fired. And arms go up saying, oh, but the HR rules and you can't do that. I know you shouldn't do that, and you could end up in a tribunal and you might lose in tribunal. It might cost you £10,000. Well, that's not relevant if the cost of not doing it is £50,000. So I would say to a lot of people out there is a challenge of recruiting good people. That's absolute because of full employment. The challenge of dealing with underperforming people is real. In every business, there's somebody who's not pulling their weight. Challenge it, recognise it. There will be a time when you've got to let someone go. And as soon as you put a cost on not making that decision, it almost always becomes greater than the cost of doing it badly, in which case, just do it. Just get it done and get them out.
And I guess an HR expert would be able to advise you on what the maximum downside would be. It'd be capped at 10,000, 50,000, whatever.
I'm not saying really go into your business today and say, you're fired, get lost. What I'm saying is make that decision, seek advice, do it as well and as quickly and as risk-free as you can, but do it. Because the cost of not doing it is greater than doing it and actually going, oh, I didn't do that properly, or I didn't have the right consultation period, oh dear. Most people don't make those decisions to fire people because of the fear of the consequences. And what I'm saying is the cost of not doing it is much greater than the cost of doing it. And the liberating effect, we've had it in our organisation once or twice over the years. When you tackle that and you deal with that, you get 10% more out of everyone else because they're fed up with carrying that person.
Definitely.
Are you sure you don't work for The Apprentice? And kind of hire and fire attitude there, Peter.
I think the principles of culture, treat people with respect and all the rest of it, we would do that. But there will come a point where you say, I've done everything I think I reasonably can to help you to be the employee we want, and that's not working. We've had some conversations with employees where we've said, they say, these aren't the rules, we shouldn't do this, but I want to look you in the eye and say, your future is not here. Now, we can do that the hard way, or we can help you find a role somewhere else. And if it takes 3 months, we're not kicking you out. We're not firing you. We're telling you your future is not here. Now,
and it's the best. It's the best for them as well. They're going to be happier doing something.
We've had employees who didn't like it at the time, who a year or 2 or 5 later have come back and said, you know what, that was the best decision then. I recognise that now. I didn't see it then. Now, whether they do or don't do that, the decision's made for our business. But I agree, if someone is a square peg in a round hole, that is as much a problem for them as it is for us, and someone has to tackle that. They often don't. The employer's responsibility is to do that.
Brilliant.
Well, thank you again, Peter, for your time. Some really valuable advice for all levels of business. What's the best way for people to get in contact with you?
As usual, through Mark Holt & Co. You can go on our website, the phone numbers are there, the email addresses are there. So if anyone has a question, pick up the phone, send me an email. Happy to talk to anyone, see what advice we can give. And
you also have a book available as well?
I do have a book, yes, Pricing for Profit. If your issues are pricing related, it's a great book. You can buy it on Amazon, you can get it on Kindle, you can come to us, we'll let you have one. So yeah, I do have a book out. Yeah, thanks for mentioning that.
Brilliant. Thanks again, Peter. So we want to know your thoughts on recruitment. If you've had any amazing successes that we can share with the community or share any recruitment disasters, send us an email at hello@yoursuccesspodcast.com or get in touch on Facebook, Twitter or Instagram.
So thanks for listening to Your Success Podcast. Please click subscribe, leave us a review, and we look forward to your comments on our Facebook page and YouTube channels. And don't forget to subscribe to our book launch, which can be found on our website. So I've been Angelos.
And I've been Mo.
And see you again on the next exciting episode of Your Success Podcast. Your Success Podcast is proudly sponsored by Your Tax Partners. If you're in business or an active property investor, talk to them to better understand your tax affairs and your options. If that's you, there is a special offer waiting for you at tiny.cc/successpod. That's tiny.cc/successpod.
You have been listening to Your Success Podcast. Click subscribe for more incredible content. More details can be found at www.yoursuccesspodcast.com.